Elizabeth Keckley. Miss Keckley is the only person on our program today who's been enslaved. She was free by the time of the Civil War and had a trade. I'm also want to say I'm representing other enslaved women, such as my great-grandmother, Harriet Hayes Robbins, her mother, Phyllis Hayes Morris, and her mother, Harriet Morris, all of whom were enslaved until the war ended. And so I'm paying tribute to all the women who were enslaved before and during the Civil War. Again, we have Ms. Keckley.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here. I was born in 1818 in Dinwiddie, Virginia.
Could you speak up a little bit?
I was born in 1818 in Dinwiddie, Virginia, on the Burwell plantation. My mother was enslaved, and therefore I was enslaved. At the age of 4, I was to become the maid of a newborn child. I was taken to the nursery, and I was told if I did a good job that I would continue to be her little maid. Now, if you think about what 4-year-olds are doing today, imagine what that was like. I was to rock her in the cradle to keep the flies off of her and make sure that she didn't cry. Well, I was a little bit too enthusiastic with my rocking, and unfortunately, the cradle tumbled over and the baby fell out. And I didn't know what to do. So I saw one of the fire shovels, and I'm trying to shovel the baby back in the cradle. The mistress came in and saw it. Of course, she was very upset, and she had me taken out and flogged. That was the first time that I realized that I was actually belonged to someone else. My mother couldn't do anything to help me, and I was just to do what I was told to do and to not complain. Because we have limited time, I'm just going to kind of go over my history. Some of it was told earlier today. One of the problems that developed in my life was that I found out that the man that I thought was my father wasn't. The master was my father. And his wife was very upset about that because she could see how much I looked like her own children. So she did her best to try to make my life miserable. I was beaten, flogged, hit with a chair, hit with a cane over the process of my life because I was considered, she felt I was too proud for the position that I was in. When she was not able to really break my spirit the way she wanted to, she gave me to a plantation owner in Hillsborough. And for 4 years, I had to live with him. And the result was, of course, my only child, George. Moving further into my life, once I had a child, of course, then I was returned to one of my original owners. And they moved to St. Louis, Missouri, because I had been taught by my mother to make ball gowns, everyday gowns, the Civil War, type of Civil War gowns that you see in magazines. I was able to raise money for my owners. And when I was in St. Louis, I was able to help feed 17 members of my owner's family on my sewing skill alone. But in St. Louis, for the first time, I saw people, colored people, free. And I decided, well, I wanted to be free. And my son, I wanted him to be free. And I started asking my owner, what do I need to do to get my freedom? And he would, well, first he said, well, you can just go and get one of those boats and go across the river and you'll be free. But I knew if I did that, I could be brought back to slavery. So I continued to ask him, and finally he said, $1,200. You get $1,200 and you can be free. Well, that was kind of difficult because all the money that I made went to my owners. But I was able to ask some of my patrons in St. Louis to help me pay for my freedom. I was able to earn $1,200 because they gave it to me. And I promised that I would work, continue to work until I paid them back. And I did. And that was around 1855. So if you think about $1,200, doesn't seem like a lot today, but that was a lot in 1855. I first went to Baltimore and tried to open a sewing facility there, but it was very slow and it just wasn't working. So I came to DC. I was able to make clothing, costumes, gowns for many of the high society ladies in Washington, D.C., the wives of the congressmen and the senators. And I even designed for Mrs. Jefferson Davis and for also Mrs. Robert E. Lee. And when the South seceded, Mrs. Davis, Marina Davis, wanted me to go south with them and continue to be her seamstress. But I was not going to do that because I was afraid I would end up in slavery again. And also, I wanted to design for Mrs. Lincoln. I was introduced to Mrs. Lincoln, and she said if my fees were reasonable, I could get all of her work. Therefore, I was able to not only become her seamstress, I was known as a modiste, which meant they were the seamstresses that made those form-fitting gowns and with a really wide skirts. And I became not only her dressmaker, but her confidant and her closest friend. My son, unfortunately, because he was very, very light-skinned, joined the Union Army as a white man. And he was killed early in the war. When Mrs. Lincoln's son was also died, that bound us even more closely together. And this is one of the reasons why she was pretty dependent upon me for a lot of things. During that period of time, it was mentioned that I helped to form the Contraband Relief Association, which was aiding free people of color that were coming into DC. I taught them to read, to write, to sew, and to take care of themselves. When President Lincoln was assassinated, I was the first person Mrs. Lincoln asked for, but they couldn't find me because they didn't know where I lived. I went to her, and they wouldn't let me through to get to her because they were afraid. The next day, the next morning, I was able to go to her, and the first thing she said, "Lizzie," because she called me Lizzie, "why didn't you come to me?" Over the time after the assassination, I went with Mrs. Lincoln to try to help sell some of her clothes because she was kind of destitute. Some of her clothes, her jewelry, her hats. And unfortunately, that was leaked out, and well, it became a sensation. And she was looked upon as not doing the right things. Now today it's different, but then it was really, really bad. So I decided to write a book, and when I go back, I will show you my book. It's called 30 Years Behind the Scenes, or 30 Years a Slave, 4 Years in the White House. And this book was actually written, it was my autobiography, but it was also written to help Mrs. Lincoln. I had the assurance from the publisher that none of the letters that I gave him to prove what I said was true would be published. But of course, you know what he did? He put them at the end of the book. And the result of that was an expose of Mrs. Lincoln at a very critical time. Her son was furious. He had all the books that he could get collected and destroyed. So she didn't benefit, I didn't benefit, and it destroyed our relationship. My last days were spent at the Home for Destitute Colored Women and Children, which I also helped found. I was brokenhearted because I did not have the special relationship with Mrs. Lincoln anymore. but I was thankful for my time in the White House. I thank you for your attendance.